We are used to imagining mammoth hunting as a chaotic scene from a Hollywood movie. A group of people in animal skins, shouting and armed with primitive spears, rush at a giant creature. This image is firmly embedded in our minds, but it has almost nothing to do with reality. In fact, hunting in the Stone Age was not an act of blind rage, but a complex mathematical task. It required precise calculation and a deep understanding of physics, ballistics, and logistics. Every action was carefully considered, and the price of a mistake was too high to rely on luck. It was a world where survival depended not on muscle power, but on intellectual power. Our ancestors were not savages, but brilliant strategists and engineers of the Ice Age. Watch the video to the end to find out what mathematical formula was used to calculate the trajectory of a spear and why the most important stage of the hunt began after it was over. Contrary to popular belief, the ancient hunter's main weapon was not a stone or a stick. It was his mind, which had undergone a cognitive revolution. The ability to think abstractly and plan weeks and months ahead was what distinguished humans from other predators. Hunting such a large creature did not begin with a chase, but with long observation and analysis. Hunters studied migration routes, seasonal habits, and landscape features. This was data collection that could take years, and the information was passed down from generation to generation. They created mental maps of the terrain, marking narrow passages, sticky soil, and natural cliffs. These features of the terrain were not obstacles, but tools. The landscape became their main ally in the upcoming operation. The key to success was communication within the group. The hunters had to understand each other without words, using a complex system of gestures and signals. Coordinating the actions of dozens of people in a stressful situation required incredible social organization. It was their ability to plan and act together that allowed them to take on tasks that would have been impossible for a single person. The group became a single organism where everyone knew their role. It was a symphony of survival, not chaotic noise. They calculated the risks and possible outcomes. What if the animal did not follow the planned route? What backup plans were there? This ability to think in multiple ways was their main advantage. Thus, the entire operation was, in essence, a complex equation with many variables. The weight of the animal, the wind speed, the strength of the ice, the endurance of the hunters, all of this was taken into account. Hunting was an intellectual contest, not a primitive slaughter. They also had to think about the future. Overhunting in one region could deprive them of their food source for years to come. Therefore, the principles of sustainable use of natural resources did not originate in our time, but there, in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. It was this leap in thinking, not physical strength, that allowed humans to reach the top of the food chain. They learned to win not with brute force, but with the power of thought. This was the greatest intellectual achievement in human history. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think were the most important cognitive skills for ancient hunters? Write about it in the comments. The main hunting tool was the spear, but it was far from a simple sharpened shaft. It was a high-tech product for its time, the result of hundreds of generations of engineering research. Every detail was important and thought out to the smallest detail. The tips were made of flint or obsidian, processed by chipping. Craftsmen were able to create incredibly sharp and symmetrical blades capable of penetrating thick skin. The technique of making such tips required many years of training and was passed down from father to son. The spear shaft was made from strong and flexible woods such as ash or yew. It was carefully straightened over a fire and polished to achieve the perfect aerodynamic shape. The balance of the spear was checked with mathematical precision so that it would fly straight and not deviate from its target. But the real revolution in warfare came with the invention of the atlatl, or spear thrower. This simple-looking device, a lever made of wood or bone, became a real accelerator. It acted as an extension of the arm, increasing the leverage and, therefore, the initial speed of the spear several times over. The physics of the atlatl are striking in their effectiveness. It allowed the spear to be thrown at a speed of over 150 kilometers per hour. This turned the hunter into a kind of artillery piece, capable of hitting a target from a safe distance. The range of a spear thrown with an atlatl could reach 100 meters. This gave hunters a huge tactical advantage. They could strike while remaining out of the animal's reach. Using an atlatl required incredible skill. The hunter had to take into account the wind speed, the weight of the spear, and the distance to the target. It was intuitive ballistics based on thousands of hours of training. In addition to spears, other tools were also used. Heavy stone balls tied with straps, bolas, could be used to entangle the animal's legs. This slowed it down and made it more vulnerable to the main group of hunters. Archaeologists have found evidence that different types of spearheads were used for different purposes. Some were designed for maximum penetration, others for inflicting widespread damage. This indicates a high level of specialization and understanding of anatomy. Thus, the weapons of ancient hunters were not a primitive set of sticks and stones. They were a complex and effective system based on a deep understanding of physics, materials, and ballistics. But what if the most effective weapon was not in their hands, but in the landscape itself? More on this in the next chapter. The most popular myth about hunting tactics is driving a mammoth to a cliff. This scene looks impressive, but in practice it was extremely ineffective and dangerous. This method would have resulted in the loss of most of the valuable meat and bones during the fall. The real tactics were much more subtle and based on a deep knowledge of the terrain. Hunters did not look for cliffs, they looked for natural traps. Such traps could be narrow ravines, swampy lowlands, or deep river fords. Their goal was not to kill the animal, but to immobilize it. By driving it into sticky mud or deep snow, they deprived it of its main advantage, its mass and strength. In this position, the animal became vulnerable and posed little danger to the hunters. There are theories that fire was used to control the movement of the herd. Rows of torches could create corridors of fire, directing the animals in the desired direction. This required the coordinated actions of a large group of people and incredible courage. Another mysterious tactic may have been the use of sound. Some researchers suggest that coordinated shouts, beats on primitive drums, or rattles could have created a wall of sound. This noise disoriented the animals and forced them to move in a predetermined direction. Archaeological finds at the Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic indicate the existence of permanent hunting camps near such natural traps. People returned here year after year, knowing that the terrain gave them a tactical advantage. It was a settled hunting strategy. There are also more mystical theories related to the ritual aspects of hunting. Perhaps some actions were not only practical, but also sacred in nature. Cave paintings may have been more than just art, but part of a magical preparation for the hunt. Some scientists suggest that hunters may have used their knowledge of animal psychology. They may have provoked young and inexperienced individuals to lure them away from the herd. This required a deep understanding of the social structure of the herd. It remains a mystery how exactly they coordinated such complex maneuvers over a huge territory. Perhaps there was a system of observers on high ground who transmitted signals to the main group. It was a real military operation. Thus, the hunting tactics were not a crude onslaught, but an intellectual chess game. The hunters exploited the weaknesses of their opponents and the strengths of the landscape. They won not by force, but by cunning and knowledge. Another popular image is that of a huge pit trap, camouflaged with branches, into which a mammoth falls. This idea, although it seems logical, faces insurmountable difficulties in practice. The reality was much more prosaic and complex. First, digging a pit large enough in the frozen ground of the Ice Age would have been a titanic task. Ancient people did not have metal shovels. Working with primitive bone or wooden tools would have taken weeks, if not months. Second, the volume of soil removed would have been enormous. Dozens of cubic meters of earth would have had to be removed somewhere, so as not to create a noticeable mound next to the pit. Such camouflage would have required an incredible amount of effort. Thirdly, even if an animal fell into the pit, it would create more problems than solutions. It would be practically impossible to extract a carcass weighing several tons from a deep pit. This would turn a valuable resource into an inaccessible trophy. It was much more likely that shallow pits with sharpened stakes were used, but not for mammoths. This tactic was suitable for smaller animals. Other methods were required for the giants of the Ice Age. Perhaps camouflage nets made of strong tendons were used instead of pits. Such nets could entangle the animal's legs, slowing its movement. But creating and installing such a giant net would also have been a difficult engineering task. Archaeological data does not confirm the widespread use of pit traps for hunting mammoths. Finds that were initially interpreted as pits later turned out to be natural depressions or the remains of dwellings. Thus, the idea of a simple and effective pit trap is most likely a myth. It underestimates the intelligence of hunters and overestimates their physical capabilities. They sought more elegant and less labor-intensive solutions. This myth shows how our modern consciousness tries to simplify the complex processes of the past. We look for simple answers to complex questions. But survival in the Ice Age required not simple, but ingenious solutions. Most likely the truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. Perhaps shallow pits were used in combination with other methods. For example, to direct the animal in the right direction or to damage a limb. In the next chapter, we will talk about what happened after the hunt was successfully completed. After all, catching a mammoth is only half the battle. Once the hunt was successfully completed, the most critical and labor-intensive stage began. Cutting up the carcass was no less complicated than the hunt itself. It was a real anatomical theater, requiring precision, knowledge, and the right tools. The entire community took part in this process. It was a collective effort, with each person having their own role. Mistakes at this stage could lead to the loss of valuable resources, which was unacceptable. The main tools were flint knives, scrapers, and chisels. An experienced craftsman could chip a blade as sharp as a modern scalpel from the core with a single stroke. These tools quickly became dull, so they had to be constantly replaced and sharpened. The process began with skinning. This was done with incredible care so as not to damage the skin. Skin was one of the most valuable resources used to make clothing, shoes, and coverings for dwellings. This was followed by the cutting of muscle tissue. The meat was cut into layers and taken to the camp for further processing. Hunters had a deep knowledge of anatomy. They knew exactly where the best cuts were and how to separate them from the bones. Internal organs were also used for food and were a source of important vitamins. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the carcass found its use in the household. Special attention was paid to fat. Fat was the main source of energy in cold climates. It was collected in leather bags and used for cooking, lighting, and as a preservative. Bones and tusks were extremely valuable. They were not left behind but carefully cleaned and transported to the camp. They were the main building and craft materials of the era. The entire process of cutting up the carcass took many hours and required the coordinated efforts of dozens of people. It was a race against time, as the carcass could attract other predators. Therefore, guards were posted around the cutting site. Very little was left at the hunting site. This testifies to an incredibly rational and thrifty approach to resources. Our ancestors understood the value of everything that nature gave them. Hunting and butchering a mammoth was only part of the task. Now the community faced a complex logistical problem: how to preserve and transport tons of meat, fat, bones, and hides. Some of the meat was eaten immediately at the hunting site. It was a kind of feast, a reward for hard and dangerous work, but most of it had to be preserved for the future. The main method of preservation was freezing. In winter, the meat was simply left in the cold, where it could be stored for months. In summer, it was stored in deep pits dug in the permafrost, which acted as natural refrigerators. Another method was drying and curing. The meat was cut into thin strips and hung on wooden frames. The wind and sun removed moisture, turning the meat into a light and nutritious product that could be stored for a very long time. Smoking may also have been used. The smoke from the fire not only preserved the meat, but also gave it a special flavor. This method also repelled insects. Transporting resources was a separate problem. Ancient people did not have wheeled carts. Most likely they used primitive sleds that they pulled themselves. This explains why settlements were often located near hunting grounds. It was impractical to transport large amounts of resources over long distances. It was easier for the entire community to move closer to the food source. This strategy was called nomadic logistics. The group did not wander chaotically across the tundra, but moved between key points. These were base camps, hunting grounds, and sources of flint. Stocks provided the basis for survival during periods of famine. They allowed the community to survive a long winter or an unsuccessful hunting season. The ability to plan stocks was the key to stability. Thus, the lives of ancient hunters were subject to strict logistics. They were not just nomads, but resource managers. Their survival depended on their ability to plan, preserve, and transport. In the next chapter, we will learn how our ancestors used mammoths for more than just food. For ancient humans, the mammoth was not just a source of food. It was a universal resource that provided for almost all areas of life. The use of every part of the carcass was perfected. Mammoth bones were the main building material. Massive skulls, shoulder blades, and pelvic bones were used to create frames for dwellings. These dwellings were covered with skins and insulated with moss. They were incredibly durable and warm, capable of withstanding the harshest winters. It was a unique architecture of the Ice Age. Mammoth tusks were a valuable craft material. They were used to carve spearheads, needles, awls, and knife handles. The strength and plasticity of the tusk made it an ideal material for tools. In addition, tusks were used to create true works of art. Animal figurines, bracelets, necklaces, and the famous Paleolithic Venuses were made from them. These items speak to the developed culture and aesthetic needs of our ancestors. Hides were used to make clothing, shoes, bedding, and coverings for dwellings. The thick and durable mammoth hide provided reliable protection from the cold and wind. Processing it was a complex and laborious process. Fat was used not only for food, but also for lighting. It was poured into stone bowls with moss wicks. Such fat lamps provided even light and heat, allowing people to work in their homes on long winter evenings. Even the tendons were put to good use. They were woven into strong ropes, threads for sewing clothes, and bowstrings. It was an indispensable material for fastening and binding. Thus, the mammoth was the basis of the entire material culture of the Paleolithic era. It provided food, clothing, shelter, tools, and even art objects. Its disappearance was a real disaster for the people of that time. This total utilization speaks of a deep respect for the hunted animal. Nothing was to be wasted. It was a fundamental principle of survival. Hunting mammoths was impossible alone. It required the participation of the entire community and had a complex social structure. It was a collective endeavor where success depended on the coordinated actions of each individual. The hunting group was most likely led by the most experienced and wise hunter. He was not a leader in the modern sense, but rather a strategist and coordinator. His authority was based on his knowledge and successful hunts in the past. There was a clear division of labor within the group. There were beaters, whose job was to drive the animal in the right direction. There were spear throwers, the strongest and most accurate men. There were also scouts who tracked herds and looked for convenient places to hunt. They could be away from camp for several days, risking their lives. The initial success of the entire operation depended on their work. Women and teenagers also took part. They could make noise to help the drivers or prepare tools and equipment. After the hunt, they were responsible for the main work of cutting up and preserving the meat. The elders were the keepers of knowledge. They did not participate in the hunt itself, but their advice was invaluable. They remembered migration routes, successful tactics, and the medicinal properties of plants. Training young hunters was a long and difficult process. They started small, participating in the hunt for small game. Only the most capable and resilient were allowed to hunt mammoths. The spoils were most likely divided among all members of the community according to certain rules. This ensured the survival of the elderly and all those who could not hunt. The principle of collectivism was the basis of the social structure. Such a complex organization required a developed system of communication. They had to negotiate, plan, and resolve conflicts. Mammoth hunting stimulated the development of social skills. This model of society, based on cooperation and division of labor, proved incredibly successful. It allowed humans to survive in the harshest conditions. We are still reaping the benefits of this social invention. Mammoth hunting was not just a means of obtaining food, but a central event in the spiritual life of ancient people. It was surrounded by many rituals, beliefs, and myths. It was a dialogue between humans and the spirit world. Cave paintings in caves such as Lascaux or Altamira often depict hunting scenes. Many scholars believe that this was not just art, it was a magical ritual designed to ensure good luck in the upcoming hunt. By depicting a wounded animal, the hunter was, in a sense, programming reality. He performed a symbolic act in the spirit world so that it would come to pass in the material world. Art was a tool of magic. There were probably certain taboos associated with hunting. For example, a ban on hunting at certain times of the year or on females. These rules had not only ecological, but also sacred meaning. Shamans played a key role in spiritual preparation for hunting. They entered a trance, communicated with animal spirits, asked them for forgiveness and permission to hunt. This was to establish a balance between the world of humans and the world of nature. After a successful hunt, rituals of gratitude were performed. Part of the prey could be sacrificed to the spirits. This was payment for the life taken and a guarantee of future success. Figurines of mammoths carved from tusks or stone could serve as amulets. Hunters carried them with them, believing that they gave them strength and protected them from danger. These objects connected them to the spirit of the mighty beast. Myths and legends about mammoths were passed down by word of mouth around the campfire. In these stories, the mammoth was not just an animal, but a progenitor, a deity, or a guardian of the world. It was the central character in their cosmology. Perhaps there was a cult of the bear, which was man's main competitor in the struggle for resources. The skulls of cave bears found in caves may have been part of complex ritual practices. Thus, the world of the ancient hunter was filled with spiritual meaning. Hunting was not just a technology for survival, but a sacred ritual. It shaped their worldview, art, and social relations. The era of mammoth hunting ended about 10,000 years ago. Their disappearance was one of the most dramatic events in the history of the planet. Scientists still argue about the causes of this catastrophe. One of the main theories links the extinction of mammoths to climate change. The end of the Ice Age led to warming, melting glaciers, and changes in vegetation. The tundra steppes, which were the main food source for mammoths, were replaced by forests and swamps. The giants simply could not adapt to the new conditions. Their digestive system was designed to digest dry grass, not tree branches. The change in diet could have led to their weakening and extinction. Another theory blames humans. According to the Paleolithic Blitzkrieg hypothesis, our ancestors, armed with effective hunting technologies, exterminated the mammoths. They were too successful as predators. Archaeological findings support this theory. The appearance of humans in new territories, such as North America, often coincides with the disappearance of megafauna. This seems to be more than just a coincidence. Most likely, the truth lies somewhere in between. Climate change weakened mammoth populations, making them more vulnerable. Humans then dealt the final blow to the already declining herds. The disappearance of mammoths was a turning point in human history. Humans lost their main source of resources. This forced them to look for new strategies for survival. Some groups switched to hunting reindeer, others to fishing and gathering. Ultimately, this crisis pushed humanity towards the Neolithic Revolution. People began to engage in agriculture and animal husbandry. Thus ended an entire era that had lasted tens of thousands of years. An era when humans and mammoths were the main actors on the stage of the Ice Age. Their confrontation and coexistence shaped us into who we are today. The history of mammoth hunting is not a story of savagery, but of the greatness of human intelligence. It teaches us that the most complex problems are solved not by force, but by knowledge, planning, and cooperation. The last mammoths disappeared from Wrangel Island just 4,000 years ago. At that time, the pyramids were already being built in Egypt. This reminds us of how quickly our world is changing. We have completed our journey into the world of real mammoth hunting. Today, we have seen that behind the familiar myths lies a complex reality based on intelligence, strategy, and a deep knowledge of nature. Hunting was not just a way of obtaining food, but a real science and art of survival. Our ancestors were not primitive savages, but ingenious engineers, logisticians, and strategists. Their legacy is not only stone tools, but also the very ability to plan and cooperate in complex ways, which is the foundation of our civilization. What aspect of mammoth hunting did you find most surprising or impressive? Do you think modern humans, armed only with ancient technologies, could survive in the conditions of the Ice Age? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the mysteries of the past.